How did an orphan boy with no money in his pocket and no connections build a watch brand? A large part of Rolex's history is hidden behind mystery and secrets, but today we will bring Rolex's incredible story of wealth back into focus.
The story of Rolex begins with the company's innovative and unconventional founder, Hans Wiesler. Hans was born in 1881 in Germany as the child of Anna and G. His childhood was quite happy and peaceful. However, at intervals of just a few months, he lost both his father and his mother at the age of 12. From that moment on, Hans's life changed. When his uncles sent him to a boarding school, Hans was deeply demoralized because of the difficult times he had gone through. But after a while, he decided to overcome this situation by focusing on his schoolwork and studies. He especially enjoyed learning different languages. This would pave the way for him to move abroad after finishing school. He began working in Switzerland at a company called Kuhn & Horten, which was a major exporter of various kinds of pocket watches. Hans, who spoke German, English, and French, worked at the firm as a clerk and correspondent. Since the company produced its own watches, this role gave Hans the opportunity to understand watchmaking and closely examine the watchmaking industry. Although the job involved repetitive tasks such as winding hundreds of watches every day, during this period Hans developed a deep admiration for the craft and became obsessed with the idea of creating perfect watches. Later, in 1903, Hans moved to London to work for another company where he had a bigger role, such as finding new sales and customers. This gave him the opportunity to understand what makes one watch brand different from another and how important marketing is to a brand's success. Although these different jobs were quite enjoyable, Hans was dreaming much bigger and wanted to apply the skills he had learned for himself. In 1905, at the age of 24, Hans decided to establish his own watch company. He had a small amount of money that he had saved to invest in the business. However, most of the funds came from his future brother-in-law, Alfred Davis. Together, they founded the Wilsdorf and Davis Company.
And they began importing watches from Switzerland to sell in the United Kingdom. However, at that time, wristwatches were not as popular as they are today and were mostly seen as women's jewelry. Hans's friends even said that a watch with such a small and delicate mechanism would be fragile and easy to break, and that such a small watch could not keep accurate time. Pocket watches were far more preferred. But according to Hans's personal view, pocket watches would almost completely disappear, and wristwatches would definitely take their place. He believed that they only needed to be high quality. For this reason, Hans ignored all the criticism and took all of the company's money to place one of the largest wristwatch orders of that time. He believed that wristwatches would dominate the future. Everyone thought he was crazy. Even his partner was not very enthusiastic about this idea, but Hans did not give up. He met with people who were considered the best watchmakers and tried to learn at least one new piece of knowledge from each of them. Using an old connection from his time working in Switzerland, he imported Swiss-made movements to begin producing high-quality wristwatches. Of course, Hans knew that quality alone would not be enough, and that brand recognition would be the most important element. Everything depended on having a memorable name. The story behind the name Rolex is somewhat interesting. Although it is claimed that Hans tried every possible letter combination and generated hundreds of names, he could not find one that truly satisfied him. One day, while scribbling something at work, he discovered something interesting. According to Hans, a genie whispered in his ear and said the name Rolex. Whatever the true source of the story may be, the name was perfect. Rolex was short, memorable, and easy to pronounce in every language. In addition, the name Rolex carried an elegant yet authoritative aura. For this reason, Hans began printing this name on the dials of all his watches, which helped increase brand recognition. In fact, a few years later, they changed the company's entire name to Rolex Watch Company Limited. The new Rolex watches began selling rapidly. In 1910, Rolex became the first wristwatch to receive a precision certificate. Then, in 1914, the British Kew Observatory awarded a Rolex watch an A-class rating, something no wristwatch of that kind had received before. Rolex began to be associated with quality, which helped drive even more sales.